The Cold War era was marked by a pervasive sense of existential threat, a time when the specter of nuclear war loomed over every aspect of American life. In this climate of paranoia and preparation, the U.S. government undertook a series of secretive experiments aimed at ensuring survival in the event of atomic catastrophe. Among these was a little-known and deeply unsettling program: the Smithfield ham radiation experiment, conducted in the 1960s by the U.S. Army. This initiative sought to test the viability of irradiated food, specifically Smithfield hamzas, a long-term preservation method for military and civilian use in post-nuclear scenarios. The experiment remained buried in classified archives until the 1990s, when the Department of Energy released a trove of Cold War-era radiation testing records, revealing the extent of the program and the risks it posed to unsuspecting local communities. Smithfield, Virginia, long known for its iconic cured hams, was chosen as the site for this experiment, not only because of its reputation for producing shelf-stable meat, but also for its proximity to military research facilities. The U.S. Army's interest in irradiated food was part of a broader initiative to develop technologies that could sustain troops and civilians in fallout shelters for extended periods. Traditional methods of food preservation, canning, salting, smoking were deemed insufficient for the unique challenges posed by nuclear war. Irradiation, which involved exposing food to controlled doses of ionizing radiation to kill bacteria and parasites, promised a solution that could extend shelf life without refrigeration. The Smithfield ham radiation experiment was conducted under the auspices of the Army's Quartermaster Food and Container Institute, a division tasked with developing military rations. The hams was subjected to gamma radiation using cobalt-60 sources, a process that was believed to sterilize the meat while preserving its flavor and texture. The irradiated hams were then stored under various conditions and periodically tested for microbial growth, chemical changes, and palatability. Some were shipped to military bases for field testing, while others were quietly distributed to civilian institutions, including hospitals and schools, as part of a covert study on consumer acceptance. What made the experiment particularly controversial was the lack of informed consent and public disclosure. Residents of Smithfield and surrounding areas were not told that their local food supply was being used in radiation experiments. Workers at the ham processing plants were unaware that some of the products they handled had been exposed to ionizing radiation. There were no warning labels, no public hearings, and no environmental assessments. The assumption was that the benefits of the research enhanced food security in the event of nuclear war outweighed the risks. This paternalistic approach to public health and safety was emblematic of the era, when government agencies routinely conducted experiments without informing or protecting the populations involved. The secrecy surrounding the Smithfield ham radiation experiment was maintained through a combination of bureaucratic obfuscation and classified documentation. Internal memos referred to the project using vague code names, and reports were filed under unrelated research categories to avoid scrutiny. The Army collaborated with private contractors and academic institutions, many of which were bound by non-disclosure agreements. Funding was routed through discretionary budgets, and oversight was minimal. The experiment was part of a larger pattern of Cold War radiation testing, which included exposing soldiers to nuclear blasts, injecting hospital patients with radioactive isotopes, and feeding irradiated food to children in institutional settings. Concerns about contamination and environmental impact were largely ignored. While the irradiation process itself did not make the hams radioactive, there was little understanding at the time of the long-term effects of consuming irradiated food. Studies on the chemical byproducts of irradiation were inconclusive, and some researchers warned that the process could produce carcinogenic compounds. Moreover, the facilities used for irradiation were not always properly shielded, raising the possibility of accidental exposure to workers and nearby residents. In Smithfield, anecdotal reports of increased illness and unexplained symptoms began to circulate, but without access to information. Residents had no way to connect these issues to the secret experiments taking place in their community. The truth began to emerge in the early 1990s, when Energy Secretary Hazel O'Leary initiated a sweeping declassification of Cold War-era radiation experiments. The Department of Energy released thousands of documents detailing previously unknown programs, including the Smithfield ham radiation experiment. Researchers and journalists combed through the records, uncovering evidence of the Army's involvement, the use of local food products, and the lack of public oversight. The revelations sparked outrage among residents and renewed scrutiny of government ethics in scientific research. The documents revealed that the experiment had been deemed a success by military standards. The irradiated hams remained shelf-stable for years, retained acceptable taste and texture, and showed no signs of microbial contamination. However, the long-term health effects on consumers were never adequately studied. The program was quietly discontinued in the late 1970s as public opposition to food irradiation grew and new preservation technologies emerged. By then, the damage had been done not only to public trust, but potentially to the health of those who had unknowingly consumed irradiated products. The Smithfield ham radiation experiment is a stark example of how Cold War imperatives overrode ethical considerations. It reflects a time when national security was used to justify secrecy, and when scientific progress was pursued without regard for transparency or consent. The experiment also highlights the vulnerability of rural communities, which were often targeted for research because of their isolation and lack of political clout. Smithfield's reputation as a producer of high-quality hams made it an ideal test site, but its residents were treated as expendable variables in a military equation. In the years following the declassification, efforts were made to investigate the health impacts of the experiment. Independent researchers conducted epidemiological studies, but the lack of detailed records and the passage of time made it difficult to draw definitive conclusions. Some former workers reported chronic health issues, while others expressed anger at having been kept in the dark. Legal action was considered but ultimately stalled due to the challenges of proving causation and the expiration of statutes of limitation. The legacy of the Smithfield ham radiation experiment continues to resonate in debates over food safety, government transparency, and ethical research. It serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of informed consent. The experiment also underscores the need for robust oversight mechanisms to ensure that scientific innovation does not come at the expense of public health and civil liberties. Today, food irradiation is a regulated practice, approved by the FDA for certain products and subject to labeling requirements. Advances in technology have made the process safer and more precise, and studies have shown that irradiated food can be a valuable tool in reducing foodborne illness. However, the shadow of past abuses lingers, and public skepticism remains. The Smithfield ham radiation experiment is a reminder that scientific progress must be guided by ethical principles and that the pursuit of security must never eclipse the rights of individuals. The story of Smithfield is not just about irradiated hams, it is about the intersection of science, secrecy, and society. It is about the choices made in times of fear and the consequences of those choices for generations to come. It is about the need to remember, to reckon, and to ensure that history does not repeat itself. The experiment may have been buried in classified archives, but its lessons are clear and enduring. In the pursuit of survival, we must never lose sight of humanity.